All right. Okay, so here we go. Continuing on. So the next question is: we got persons, we got natures, and we got persons. So what is a soul? Okay, what is a soul? This may also help us with what we were just talking about with what do we call animals or plants? You know, if they're not persons, what are they? Okay. So here's a soul. The non-physical, important because we're talking about metaphysics, non-physical, rational substance in which the rational faculties are grounded.
Substance.
Yeah, substance. Non-physical rational substance in which the rational faculties are grounded.
Yeah.
That's an excellent question. What does that mean? Okay, so let's ask first what rational faculties we're talking about, because that may help us flesh it out a little bit. Flesh, when we're talking about non-physical.
Flesh it out.
I'm on a game today with my puns, I know. Unfortunately, everyone else thinks they're lame or doesn't understand them, but that's okay. I'm secure enough in myself.
I think that they're
all right. So rational faculties, by that I mean intellect, will, emotion. Okay? Faculties. These are your faculties. Now look, at Carl Albert State College, we have groups of people that work here, right? We've got administration, staff, and faculty. Okay? I'm part of the faculty section, right? Where we're all necessary to make the college run, okay? But I'm part of the faculty section. Faculty is, now together we're one faculty, right? But we're made up of multiple parts and we all have our specializations, right? So like I'm over here in general studies, English, philosophy, and religion. Because we're a small school, I have 3 specialties, right? And then over there, my husband's in life sciences, biological sciences, okay? So we have different specialties, okay? But together, along with psychology and history and business and right, all those guys, together we form a complete educational package. Does that make sense? Same thing, that's where the word faculty comes from, okay? You have these parts and together they make a good whole, okay? So same thing here. You are more than the sum of your parts, but you do have parts, okay? So intellect, will, and emotion together form this rational faculty. Does that make sense? Okay. Sometimes the soul is equated with the mind. Notice I said mind and not brain. Why did I say mind and not brain?
Because mind and brain are 2 completely different things.
Yeah, but how would we know that just based on the definition of this?
We would know that mind is non-physical, for starters. You know, the brain is an organ. The brain is
good. The brain is a physical substance, right?
Body.
The brain is a physical substance. And we already said, whatever this is, if it's a mind, a soul, whatever, if it exists, okay, is a non-physical substance. So therefore it cannot be the brain. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So sometimes when we talk about soul, sometimes soul has like a religious connotation to it, and people are uncomfortable with that, or they'll say, no, I don't think we have souls, but we do have minds. There are very few people that would say you don't have a mind. Maybe you're acting as if you don't have one, but to have it be totally absent, right? Now this brings up questions of like, what about people in vegetative states? What about unborn children, right? Fetuses, like what, do they have minds? You know, I mean, that's a really good question. But remember, keep in mind when you're thinking about those things, the difference between the capacity and ability, right? You have to have the capacity for it, but your ability could be hindered for various reasons at some point. Yeah.
What makes a baby take form?
We're really going to have this question right now? Or this conversation?
I know that part.
I know,
like, it's inside the womb. What makes it form?
It is informed by cellular division and DNA. And stem cells that are there at the very beginning dictate what kinds of cells are formed when they divide. So they divide, and then eventually those cells are informed by the DNA to actually
where
take
do they come from?
Magic.
Where does what come from?
Stem cells and all that.
Okay, well, when mommies and daddies love each other.
Does it come from the female? Like, because she's already got the egg. I mean, the sperm in her.
It comes from both.
Oh, really?
Interesting thing. I mean, the stem cells are produced when the sperm and egg get together. I mean, there is something interesting that happens there that most scientists, I'm speaking out of my field now, so I don't know, but exactly. But there is something interesting that happens when the sperm enters the egg to begin, because I think your question might be more suited to what starts that division. Like, what is it about the sperm entering the egg that then begins that division? Yeah. I don't know, and nor do I don't think anybody. Something happens. It is some kind of electrical something. Yeah.
We gotta produce what we are. Right?
Yeah. And it eventually, okay, so egg and sperm combine and they form one unit, right?
Embryo,
And then, well, not yet. It's just a zygote. Yeah. So then you've got cellular division, and they divide and divide and divide and divide. So it multiplies quickly to become what we are, right? It is weird. It's super weird. Yeah.
So when does a fetus become a person?
That is a very good question. Yeah, it's a very good question. Okay. So also, I mean, it is a good question with this one, though, because if we're talking about a mind, right, what do you have to have in order to have a mind? I mean, would we say that a fetus has intellect, will, and emotion? Well, no. Would we say that a fetus has capacity for intellect, will, and emotion?
It has capacity for growth.
But not the ability. So at what point do they have the capacity? Because if we're going to say you have to have the capacity for these things, maybe not necessarily the ability for various reasons, but you have the capacity for it. So we would say a fetus has the capacity for it because eventually it becomes us, right? But at what point does it have the capacity? Does it have the capacity when it has a heartbeat, when brainwaves are detected, when it looks physically a little more like a human, or is it like pro-life people would argue at conception? Because that thing is going to turn into us, right? Barring any defeaters of any kind.
Yeah.
Okay? So like what, you know what I mean? So at that point, I mean, how far back, like what dividing line are you going to operate by? If you're going to say capacity, if you're going to go by the capacity rule, at what point does it have the capacity? Well, I mean, I don't know, right? That's a good question, and that's a big part of the pro-life, pro-choice argument.
And like the sperm, like I said, is it living? Like already, I mean, I know it's in there.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, they're both living structures as far as, they're cells.
The egg is
Minute.
got any kind of living?
Yeah, an egg is a cell.
It's the largest cell.
It's a single cell.
Think, but it's there.
It's the largest cell in the human body.
I think that it is. Yeah.
It is.
The nucleus is its brain, so it does think.
That's sort of, yeah, it doesn't have a brain though. I mean, it doesn't.
The
think.
control
Sperm,
center of the
it's just
cell.
like-
But
It's biologically alive.
Voluntary action that makes it swim. Like,
Yeah.
Is that just like?
It's part of, yeah, you gotta ask my husband about this because he can tell you all the, it's really cool. Like it really is cool how it moves and stuff like that. Yeah. Awesome. Cells have different ways of locomotion. Like different cells have different ways. They have the little cilia around them too.
Flagellia.
Yeah, it's very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Okay. So this is interesting though because cells can move and do things, right? They can absorb other cells, or they can, my son's on antibiotics right now for bronchitis. So like you talk about like things going in there and destroying things, and cells doing battle and stuff like that. So like, but they don't have minds. Okay, they're alive, but they don't have minds, nor do they have the capacity for minds. Okay, so we would say that a cell does not have a soul. There, I can now use them in the same sentence, okay? A cell doesn't have a soul because it doesn't have these rational faculties, okay? A single cell organism does not have intellect, will, and emotion, okay? So it doesn't have a soul in that sense. Does that help you kind of divide it out a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the other, so sometimes we call it a mind. Now here's the other thing. All persons have souls, for sure. Okay, if a soul exists, all persons have souls. Why? You're about to ask why?
No, I was gonna say, aren't we like made up of cells?
Yes.
So don't we have cells?
Except that a soul is a non-physical part, which means that it wouldn't be made of cells anyway. If it did exist, it wouldn't matter what we're made of because it doesn't depend on physical substances. Terry?
Have you ever heard of the idea that the electricity that courses through our nervous system could potentially be the soul?
I have.
I always thought that was interesting.
The
but-
electricity that forces.
Because we have electric impulses
Or like,
in our
yeah,
nervous
we-
neurons
system.
firing and stuff like
we
that.
have enough electricity inside of our brains to pretty much power a house. If we hooked ourselves to it, you
Crazy.
could power your own
I
house.
bet that'd be
Okay,
beautiful.
so hang on. Okay, so stay with me. So this, remember I told you it was a rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
And this is where some people are like, I hate this, when will it be done? And other people are like, I love it, let's do more. Okay, it's the most polarizing subject that I teach in this class, okay?
I
It
like
really
it.
does, people divide.
I'm
So
into it.
whatever camp you're in, right? Okay, retool and remember this, your brain, if you're in the camp of like, this is awesome, your brain just goes in like 9,000 directions, right? You gotta rein it in, okay? Now these questions, all the questions you're asking are good ones, but in order to understand the answers, you gotta have some categories in place, right? You gotta have some definitions in place. If you're the person, so rein it in and focus. If you're the person that's like, I hate this, when will it be over? I hate my life right now, then you gotta rein it in and focus, okay? Because the only way out of that feeling is to go further in. Okay? That's the only way out. Because A, you're stuck here anyway until we finish it, right? And B, it's really going to be super, super boring and really overwhelming and more boring on top of more boring if you don't try to figure it out. C, this is you. And if you don't care about who you are, what does that say about the state of your life? Okay? You might want to do some other work on your own time mentally. Okay? So, either way, you got to rein it in and focus, okay? So if that's you and you need to like do a check on yourself right now and like retool in the middle of class, do it now, okay? Do it now. All right, so all persons have souls. So let's think about that for a second. Persons are individual instances of natures that have appropriately complex mental capacities, okay? So that means all those mental capacities, right, are housed in the soul, okay? They're those intellectual, rational faculties, intellect, will, and emotion, okay? All right. The mental life, this is another reason, Van, why it probably is true that we have a soul or a mind, if you want to just call it a mind. If you're not comfortable with soul, that's fine. The mental life is non-physical. Therefore, it requires something non-physical to house it in. Okay? We could say, well, it's housed in the brain, but the problem is that the brain is a physical structure. It does what it does really well, but it does not do non-physical, because it is physical, okay? However, it does seem that, we talked about this last time, it seems that we have a it seems that we have a mental life, a thought life. Remember, Justice was like, never heard of that before, okay? Seems like we have a thought life, right? And so we could say, like we talked about last time, we could say, well, those things that seem like they're thoughts are just productions of neurons firing, chemicals, right? Which are all physical structures in the brain, okay? But the problem is that neurons firing is neurons firing, and that's not a thought.
Yeah, that's just a bit.
Okay? Chemicals are chemicals, they're not thoughts. Okay? You can't get something non-physical by adding up physical plus physical plus physical plus physical equals, it's always going to be physical. Okay? You can't get non-physical from physical. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like adding
So-
positives.
so the-
Right, you're never going to get a negative.
So that one idea that I said, or that
All
one
math
deal,
that I know.
so that was contradictory to that? Because like in the sense of like
Right.
electricity of the soul, because electricity is so physical.
Right. Yep.
So where does the soul come from?
Good question. Okay, souls go with persons, but not natures. Okay, remember nature's up here? You get a person with a soul, but natures don't have souls. Nature is just the kind. Okay?
This is still in the category of what's the controversial.
No, the controversial ones are the two, the divine and angelic natures.
Oh, so we're saying this does exist.
Well, I mean, some people, and we'll talk about it here in a second, or maybe not, but maybe Friday. Some people don't think that they exist, don't think that souls exist at all. Some people think that we really are, we don't
Just
have
a-
a non-physical
just a
part
bag
of
of
us. We
skin.
really are all physical. That's a legit branch, yeah.
So,
If it does exist, though, this is what it's like.
so if there's a possibility of divine and angelic, would they have souls as well?
Yes, souls go with persons.
Okay,
divine and
that's
angelic
part of the
would be
nature.
persons.
And because those two, let's just say they exist for a second, those two natures produce persons.
Just two
And persons, right, persons have souls. Okay, so then you could talk about like, okay, well, what about like plant and animal? They produce individual instances, but we don't call them persons. So do they have souls? Plants have souls. Do dogs have souls?
No.
I guess not all dogs go to heaven.
Because they are not person.
Yeah. According to this, it's because they're not because they're not persons, they wouldn't have souls.
Yeah.
I happen to have the view that I think that it's possible that animals and plants do have souls, but they're so vastly different from what we're talking about here because their nature is completely different from ours, right? They're so vastly different that it's difficult to call them the same thing. But there is something, I think that there's something there.
I would consider a dog to have some kind of soul. They can feel emotion. They can be sad and weak. Dogs can be depressed. Yes. Why not? When they whine.
I'd say they have a certain type of mind.
They have to have a soul, they have to have an
Maybe it's
intellect,
different than
emotion,
ours,
right?
but I
What about the
I-
dolphins? Dolphins are hyper intelligent like us.
Yeah.
What if they have some sort of consciousness?
Do they have a will?
I mean, it's possible.
Yeah, there would be
I'm-
no way for us to know
I'm
though,
open
because
to
we
it.
can comprehend.
Right. This is
their
why
soul.
communication is so important. Because it could be the case that the only reason we don't know that is because we can't communicate.
Because dolphins can also feel emotion like joy and depression and whatnot.
So if they have intellect and emotion, maybe they could have will, which would grant them soul.
Good. This is how you let this settle in your brain, is by looking for other areas that you can apply it to. So good. Good work.
What?
Okay.
Whoa.
Hang on. You don't have to write all this down. Okay, so calm down.
All
I'm
right.
gonna start writing right now.
Yeah, what? Okay, this is pretty interesting. What we're talking about here, we're gonna kind of wait, hang on for a second. So what we're doing in this metaphysics stuff is you know how in the last big sections we kind of went through, like we presented theories and then talked about it and stuff. This one is different because there's not like theories of metaphysics. You kind of like just do it, right? And you consider special topics within metaphysics. Okay, so we just considered the special topics of person, souls, and natures. We're going to go back for a second and talk about this category thing, because then we're going to talk about properties and universals and stuff like that, which is super interesting, I think. Okay? So in order to do that, we have to go back to, remember at the beginning when we talked about what metaphysics is, we talked about that categorical analysis, how it takes things, right? It wants to take the things that exist and talk about what makes them exist. What is it about existing things that's all the same, where they exist and they don't not exist? Okay, so it's concerned about categories all the time, categories. So it takes categories and then it could go down and down and down and down. Remember we went to like, my dog Blondie all the way up to like, what was it, a living thing or existing thing or something like that, right? They're in categories. Okay, so it wants to know what is it about these categories that makes it in that category but not in the next one, or maybe makes it a member of these 3 categories but not these 4 categories, right? It wants to know, metaphysics seeks to understand what characteristics something has, and what usually those characteristics are not physical. That's why it's metaphysics, okay? So Aristotle, this is not a new idea, okay? Aristotle had these categories, okay? These are his examples, okay? So he had these categories like, look, we could have these are kind of some of those characteristics that could put potentially things in different categories and could sort things out, okay? So for example, maybe they're in different categories because they're 2 different kinds of substances, okay? And he said there were like, there's a substance like an individual, like for example, a man or a horse, right? Or secondary, like species, okay? Now we might say that might be like more like nature and person or individual instance, right? But that's what he says. You get 2 kind of substances. You could be part of this one substance, or you could be part of the human substance, okay? You could also we could distinguish them based on quantity. Like, do they have 4 feet? Do they have 5 feet? Okay? 5-foot thing would be pretty cool. But, how about quality? Okay? Maybe their qualities are different. Okay? Now we're going to come up with different terms here in a second with these, but again, these are Aristotle's. Relation. Remember we talked about this, we're talking about truth, I think?
Mm-hmm.
Relational properties, right? If I said there's red in here, how many objects would have to be? If I said there's larger than in here, There'd have to be at least two objects. One of them would have to be larger than the other one. Because it's a relational term, yeah. So maybe we place them in different categories because of their relationality, okay? Maybe it's because of their place. Maybe it's because of their date, posture, state, action, passion, okay? He calls it passion, being cut or being burned, like you're feeling, like what's happening, right, at that time. Okay, so this is Aristotle's version of that. E.J. Lowe, which is, I wish he was still, he's barely not alive. He didn't die that long ago, otherwise you could use him as one of your super influential philosophers.
Do we need to write this now?
Yes, this one is one that you need. So E.J. Lowe took that and said, yeah, that's way too complicated.
Yeah.
Let's just put it in, let's put all those categories into some different categories, okay? And let's call them something different. And this is not like everybody thinks this, okay? There are philosophers that said that E.J. Lowe wasn't exactly correct in how he identified things, but the majority of people would say this is probably a good way to look at reality, okay? So he split reality into things that exist and things that don't, which I think is pretty basic, okay? Things that exist and things that don't. The things that exist he calls entities. Okay, so think about it. Everything that exists, physical or non-physical, okay, is in the category of existing things, and he calls that entities.
So entities is everything that
Everything that exists, yeah, entities, okay? Then he split entities into particulars and universals. Okay? He split everything that exists into particulars and universals. Okay? Particulars, you have substantive objects and non-substantive modes. I know these are really weird words, okay? But stay with me. Underneath particulars, you have substantive objects and non-substantive modes. This basically means substantive objects is like like an object, okay? This, me, right? A thing.
A physical thing.
Okay, a thing. No, it could be a thought, right? But it's a thing, okay? A substantive object to have substance to it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay? Substantive object, so a thing, okay, or a person, okay? Then you have non-substantive
That
modes.
would be thoughts.
Yeah, more like thoughts, okay? But in either case, they're individual things, okay? When you see particular, think individual, okay? Particular things. Does that make sense? Then you have universals. These are more like kinds. Remember when we talked about nature being a universal? Okay? It's a kind. That's not an individual thing. Now it kind of produces, for lack of a better word, individual things, right? Individual instances of that nature, okay? So if we're going to talk about human nature, we'll say, for instance, Terry. Okay, for instance, Emily. For instance, the other Emily. Okay? We have all these individual instances of something that's universal, but remember we talked about how they're no less human than they're all fully human. Okay? So that's a universal. It's a kind. Also, sometimes it comes in attributes. Okay? Attributes are also universals, or at least I'm going to argue that they are. Okay? Things like properties of things. Okay? Their color, their weight, their shape, okay, are properties of certain things. So those I'm going to argue are universals. So we have things and we have what they're like. Okay? Particulars and universals. Are we good so far? You're like, what does this have to do with anything? I know, hang on. Okay, to talk about this, we have to start, you don't have to write this down. Just think with me for a second, okay? To talk about this, we have to go through, and some of you are like, why don't we do this at the beginning? This is kind of what we've been doing, but I just want to kind of call it to your attention. We have to start with, this is how you work through metaphysical questions, okay? This is a method to work through. So the first thing you would do is start with what you already know. We've talked about this in this class before, this idea of going with your intuition or going with what seems to you. Okay, seemings are really important, and they can be really valuable in trying to find a good place to start thinking about stuff. How does it seem to you? Well, let's start there, okay? That's what this is basically saying. Start with what you already know, or at least you have a good reason to believe, right? Barring any defeaters, probably your brain's working well, start there, okay? Because metaphysics can feel like all of a sudden the ground snatched underneath from you, and you're like, I don't even know where I'm at, like where do I even start, okay? This is a good place to start. So look, the apple is both red and sweet. Can do. I got it, right? Or I seem to have existed longer than 15 minutes. Seems to me, right? It's not a guarantee, but it seems to me I've existed for longer than 15 minutes. Okay? Could be that I popped into existence 90 seconds ago with memories of being alive for years when really I haven't. That's possible, but probably not.
Terrifying thought.
Okay? It is a terrifying thought. But probably that's not the case. Why? It doesn't seem that way. Those experiences and memories of those experiences that we've had seem real. There's a quality to them that makes it, there's a texture there, right, that makes it more real. Okay?
We don't have any reason to believe otherwise.
And we don't have a good reason to believe otherwise. Right. So we could also talk about, so you start from critical common sense, right? That's just from like us observing the world and thinking through it. Or we could go from our knowledge of ourselves, right? Kind of like go the Descartes route. Like, I don't know anything, but I do know about me, right? So you could do like things like, I seem to be a continuing self. Have you ever thought about yourself in that way? I'm a continuing self. In other words, from the moment the sperm and egg came together, okay, to now me, it's always been me.
Yes.
I used to be this tall, and then in 6th grade I was this tall. And now I've been this tall ever since, right? I mean, okay, but it's still me, right? I used to be the person that liked these things, but now I'm the person that hates those things and likes these things, but it's still me, okay? Why? Because I'm a continuing self. Okay, I'm a continuing self. All sorts of stuff could happen about you. My mom, for example, had a brain tumor the size of a lemon. Not joking, the size of a lemon, removed from her, right behind her forehead, right here. Frontal lobe, yes. It wasn't in her frontal lobe, it was
just
on it.
On top of it.
Yeah, okay, huge. Like this was like longer ago than that. 4 years ago? 5 years ago, I think, something like that. Okay, so right around this time, around 5 years ago, it was in September that she had the surgery. But it's taken her about this long. I'd say she's been back to herself for about a year. Okay, it took her that long to recover from that. Now she might accept it now, but man, it was rough going through. She did not accept the fact that she was a different person. In a lot of ways, she was. She has different likes and dislikes. I mean, that is massive brain trauma, right? So different likes and dislikes, different things bother her. Some things she does that used to bother her don't, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, she has some behaviors that are different. In a lot of ways, she's a different person. But in all the ways that matter, she's the same person, right? Such that my dad, bless his heart, can look at her and say, well, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, right? When he says, this is not the woman I married, and she probably isn't. Is he still committed at that point, right? These are all like metaphysical questions, okay? But she's still a continuing self. Even if a lot of things happen to make her different, she's still a continuing self. She's an awesome self, by the way. She's real spastic and crazy. She's got this curly red hair that's like that. Super artistic, writer, and used to be a dancer in college. Anyway, okay. I am distinct from the rest of the world. Right? There's me and there's the rest of the world, okay? I'm separate from it, okay? I can go hide from it if I want to, right? I can make free will choices. It does seem like that it seems like I can make free will choices. And it also seems that I possibly may be able to survive the death of my body. I'm not saying I do. It's just saying it seems possible that I could. It's not logically impossible anyway.
Possible to be able to survive
The death of my own body. Yeah. Okay, so we start there. Start with what you know. So if at this point, I know it's time. If at this point you're like, again, back to the whole like, either I hate this or I love this. Either way, this stuff applies to you. Okay, to get your footing and to make it meaningful, even a little bit, start here. Okay, there's 2 more steps, and that'll lead us into a conversation about particulars and universals that might blow your mind a little bit, if it's not already blown.
2050.
In 2050, Van is going to become a robot. Mark it down, people.
Maybe
I
I'll
will
learn
too.
about babies.
What better way to live forever than just